One rookie turned a struggling women's league into a $3 billion business in 2 years, and now that same league cannot decide if it wants to protect her or punish her for it. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why the league's own new documentary series left her out of the story, why her own teammates are turning down invitations to share the court with her, and why the answer to all of it traces back to one number nobody in the league office wants to say out loud. Stay with me, because the last 5 minutes of this video explain the one rule change coming that could flip this entire sport upside down. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel breaks down the business and drama behind women's basketball before anyone else does, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Chicago All-Star Weekend, and the numbers nobody can ignore. Tonight, the WNBA All-Star Game tips off at the United Center in Chicago, the first time this arena has ever hosted it. Caitlin Clark starts, she captains a team, and she walks into this weekend fresh off the best individual scoring stretch of her career, a 3-game run where she averaged 25 points a game and produced the first 45-point, 10-assist performance in league history. This season, she is putting up a career high in scoring, sitting inside the top 5 in the league, and second in assists. 3 years into her career, she is a 3-time All-Star. None of that is opinion. That is the box score. But the box score is not the story tonight. The story is everything happening around her, and it has been building all season long. This is the WNBA's 30th season. 30 years of a league that survived folding franchises, relocations, and years of being treated as an afterthought on the sports calendar. And in the middle of that 30th anniversary, the league finds itself with more money on the table than at any point in its history, and more public disagreement about how to handle its biggest star than at any point in its history, both at the exact same time. That is not a coincidence. Those two facts are directly connected, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how. The $3 billion bet. Here is the number that explains almost everything else in this video. In 2024, the WNBA signed an 11-year media rights deal worth roughly $2.2 billion, bringing Disney, NBC, and Amazon on board, starting this season. That deal has since grown. Add renewed agreements with CBS and ION, plus a new arrangement with USA Network. And reporting now puts the total value above $3 billion, with an average annual value more than 6 times what the league's previous deal was worth. This is not charity money. Networks do not hand over that kind of cash because they admire the sport's history. They pay because they believe a specific audience is going to show up, and one player has been the single biggest driver of that audience growth since she entered the league. Every major broadcast partner scheduled her games for national windows this season. NBC even had her on air this year as an in-studio guest during NBA coverage, sitting alongside Carmelo Anthony, Vince Carter, and Tracy McGrady. So when people say the money is tied to one player, that is not a conspiracy theory. That is a business fact the league itself has acknowledged, and it created a problem nobody fully solved before the season started, because the money landed in a locker room that had spent a decade building an identity around the idea that no single player is bigger than the team. Keep that tension in mind, because it explains almost every controversy we are about to walk through. The Olympic decision that started the whole conversation. To understand why this tension between generations feels so old at this point, you have to go back to June of 2024, before Clark had even played a single WNBA game as a professional. USA Basketball's selection committee announced its roster for the Paris Olympics, and Clark's name was not on it. 12 players were chosen. All 12 had prior senior national team experience. Clark, as a rookie, did not. Committee Chair Jen Rosati told reporters the decision came down strictly to the stated criteria, and that other players were simply harder to cut because they checked more of those boxes. Clark herself said publicly that she felt no real disappointment, calling the snub extra motivation and saying she hoped to make the team 4 years later instead. But it was a report from columnist Christine Brennan citing 2 longtime veterans inside the women's basketball program that turned this into a much bigger story than a normal roster decision. According to those sources, concern about how Clark's own fans might react to limited playing time on a stacked veteran roster was part of the conversation. Brennan herself wrote that if true, it was an extraordinary admission that real tension existed within the sport's old guard toward the newest, biggest star it had ever produced. That was 2 years ago. And if you have been paying attention to everything in this video so far, the throat punch, the task force, the documentary casting, the missed calls, you already know that tension never actually went away. It just kept finding new places to show up. The money finally reaches the players. In March of this year, after roughly 17 months of negotiation, the WNBA and its Players Association agreed on a new collective bargaining agreement. The numbers are staggering compared to where the league was even 1 year ago. The team's salary cap jumps from $1.5 million to $7 million in a single offseason. The average player salary rises from under $120,000 to roughly $583,000. Clark's own salary is set to jump from just over $78,000 to about $530,000. Clark called the deal one of the most meaningful moments of her career when she discussed it publicly, pointing out that when she entered the league, there were barely enough roster spots to go around. And now that number is expanding fast alongside real financial security for players who spent years grinding through off-seasons overseas just to pay their bills. The new agreement did not stop at salary. It reshaped bonus structures, expanded roster sizes so more players get a real shot at a career in the league, and improved housing benefits for athletes who, for years, were expected to figure out off-season living arrangements largely on their own. It also lays groundwork for more regular season games going forward, which means more national broadcast windows, which loops right back to that $3 billion media number we just talked about. Every piece of this league's business is connected to every other piece, and none of it exists without the other. That is the good version of this story. Money flowing in, salaries multiplying, a league finally being valued the way its players always believed it deserved to be. But more money and more attention did not calm the tension inside these locker rooms. It intensified it. And nothing exposed that faster than what happened on the court in June. Because here is the uncomfortable truth underneath a record-breaking labor deal. When the money in a league multiplies by 5 times in a single offseason, the pressure to justify that money multiplies right along with it. Every front office, every broadcast partner, every sponsor now has a much bigger financial reason to care who gets hurt, who gets the calls, and who gets left out of the story. Keep that in mind as we get into exactly how that pressure showed up on the court. The hit that reopened everything. On June 24th, during a loose ball scramble between the Indiana Fever and the Phoenix Mercury, Alyssa Thomas ended up tangled with Clark fighting for possession. During the collision, contact from Thomas landed on Clark's throat. No foul was called live. Play continued. Days later, after review, the league upgraded the play to a flagrant 2 and suspended Thomas for 1 game. Clark said afterward that this had been a recurring conversation for 3 years running, that she has been involved in several of these plays herself, and that plenty of others across the league never even get reviewed. Her larger point was simple: the technology needs to improve, the officiating needs consistent investment, and referees deserve to be treated and paid like full-time professionals doing a job that affects outcomes in real time. This did not happen in isolation. Back at last year's All-Star Weekend, Commissioner Cathy Engelbert publicly promised the league would fix its officiating problems. The league followed through on paper. a task force made up of coaches and executives was assembled to study physicality and freedom of movement. A veteran official, Eric Bruton, was brought in as a new referee performance and development advisor. And yet, nearly 2 months into this season, coaches and general managers from multiple teams were on record saying the problems were still there. The Chicago Sky were reportedly told after the fact that 3 separate calls in a single loss to Dallas were wrong. In another game entirely, officials failed to notice that Fever guard Kelsey Mitchell had already fouled out and let play continue before Indiana could even substitute her. Stick around, because the next part of this story is where the league's biggest stars stopped agreeing with each other in public. And that disagreement says more about where this sport is headed than any single missed call ever could. A locker room split in half. What makes this physicality debate so different from a normal officiating complaint is that the players themselves are not united on what the solution should even be. On one side, you have players who came up in an era where physical body-on-body basketball was simply how the women's game was played, and they wear that history with pride. 11-year veteran and 2-time champion Sydney Colson said publicly on ESPN's WNBA Countdown that she did not view the Thomas play as a flagrant foul at all, saying she grew up in an era where the sport was far more physical than that. Retired guard Lacia Clarendon made a similar point on her own podcast, arguing there is a competitive edge in being bigger and stronger and that the league should not shy away from that just because it is a women's league. On the other side, you have a growing group, led publicly by Clark herself, arguing that uncalled or undercalled physicality is not toughness. It is a player safety issue that is quietly costing people their season. Earlier this season, she said an uncalled knee to her leg left her playing through a quad contusion for the rest of a game against the Golden State Valkyries and made clear in the moment that she believed the officials should have caught it. Both sides have a real argument. That is what makes this genuinely interesting instead of manufactured outrage. This is not a rookie complaining. This is a legitimate philosophical divide about what kind of league the WNBA wants to be as the money multiplies and the audience grows. And it is playing out in real time on national television with real financial stakes attached to every single possession. And this divide is not just generational, it is competitive. Angel Reese and Clark have been linked together in headlines since before either of them played a single WNBA minute. Going back to their college matchups, their meetings became appointment viewing fast enough that the Fever and the Chicago Sky moved their matchups out of Wintrust Arena and into the United Center, the same building hosting tonight's All-Star game, just to fit the crowd. That is 2 rivals whose head-to-head games were popular enough to require a 20,000-seat upgrade. Meanwhile, a newer name has entered the conversation entirely. Paige Buchers, the reigning Rookie of the Year out of Dallas, pulled in more All-Star fan votes than anyone else in the league this year and captains the opposing team tonight. The league does not have one singular story anymore. It has several superstars competing for the same spotlight, the same endorsement dollars, and the same broadcast windows. And that competition is exactly what a $3 billion media deal was designed to create. The attendance paradox nobody wants to explain. Here is the part of this story that should genuinely confuse you, because it contradicts almost everything you would assume about a league this hot financially. In Clark's rookie season, the Fever sold out 16 of their 20 home games, 80%, and set the single-game WNBA attendance record with 20,711 fans in Washington. The following season, limited to just 13 games by injury, that sellout rate fell to 8 of 20. This season, even with Clark appearing in 20 of the Fever's first 24 games, official sellouts have dropped again, even though actual turnout is still averaging around 17,000 fans a night, which remains among the best draws in the entire league. So how do you explain a league signing record-breaking media contracts and handing out record-breaking salaries in the exact same window that its biggest draw's own building is selling out less often? Part of it is simple economics. Ticket brokers and casual buyers priced in Clark's presence early, then pulled back once injuries made her availability uncertain game to game. Part of it is supply. 19 Fever games were moved to larger arenas for the 2026 season specifically because other franchises wanted a piece of that road demand, which tells you the appetite for watching her play away from home has not disappeared. It has just shifted onto the road schedule instead of the home one. This matters because it shows you the business case for this entire $3 billion bet is not as simple as one player, one arena, one number. It is a fragile, moving equation, and every single injury, every suspension, every missed call has a dollar figure attached to it, whether the league says so publicly or not. What the economists are actually saying. An associate professor of finance at Indiana University, Ryan Brewer, put a real number on this earlier in the season. Running the math on an expanded home slate with modest inflation, he estimated Clark's total economic impact on the league this year at around $875 million, and said he would not be surprised if the true figure crosses a full billion once merchandise, sponsorship, and secondary market ticket sales are all counted. That is one player's estimated footprint on an entire industry. And it is exactly why every single storyline in this video, the officiating fights, the documentary casting, the all-star snubs, carries more weight than a normal sports headline. When one person's health and public standing is worth close to $1 billion to a business, every decision that touches her becomes a financial decision, whether the league wants to frame it that way or not. The documentary that left her out here is the detail almost nobody is talking about, and it might be the most telling one in this entire story. This week, ESPN premiered a new 6-part documentary series called Life in the W, timed deliberately to coincide with All-Star Weekend. It is produced in part by LeBron James's production company, and it follows 3 players through what the league is calling a landmark season. Those 3 players are A'ja Wilson, Napheesa Collier, and DeWanna Bonner. Caitlin Clark is not one of them. Think about that for a second. The single player most directly tied to the $3 billion valuation of this league was not chosen as a lead subject for the league's biggest behind-the-scenes media project of the year. That is not a snub born out of nowhere. Reigning MVP A'ja Wilson has said in promotional material that players like her often feel overlooked, and Napheesa Collier's storyline includes fighting back from a season-ending ankle injury that kept her out for most of this year. The producers clearly wanted to tell a story about the league beyond its most famous face. Whether that is a deliberate corrective or simply smart storytelling, it tells you the league is actively managing how its narrative gets told. And it is choosing, at least for this project, not to center it entirely on one player. Keep that in your back pocket, because a similar pattern shows up again this same weekend. 3 names missing from the three-point line Friday night's three-point contest at Wintrust Arena in Chicago was missing 3 notable names. Reigning champions Sabrina Ionescu, Kayla McBride, and Caitlin Clark all reportedly turned down their invitations this year. The league did not publicly frame this as a conflict, and there is no confirmed single reason all 3 passed. Players skip exhibition events for all kinds of ordinary reasons every year. Rest, minor injury management, personal scheduling. It would be irresponsible to claim otherwise without confirmation, and we are not going to pretend a guess is a fact. But paired with the documentary lineup and the ongoing officiating tension, it adds to a pattern worth watching heading into the second half of this season. The players with the most individual marketing power are, in several visible moments this year, choosing to step back from the spotlight rather than lean further into it. And that pattern is exactly what makes the next part of this story worth paying attention to, because it is not about who is skipping events anymore. It is about where all of this money is actually going, and who benefits when a business this size keeps expanding into new cities. The gold rush behind the scenes. While all of this plays out on camera, the business side of the league keeps expanding at a pace nobody predicted even 3 years ago. The Golden State Valkyries joined as the league's 13th franchise, the first expansion team since 2008. The Toronto Tempo and the Portland Fire are set to follow, bringing the WNBA into new markets and even into new countries. The Tempo alone are scheduled to play several home games away from their usual arena this season, including stops at Montreal's Bell Centre and Vancouver's Rogers Arena, both of which hold well over 19,000 fans. Every one of those expansion fees, every one of those new local broadcast deals gets priced against the audience Clark's rookie season proved was out there. Team valuations that would have sounded absurd 5 years ago are now being taken seriously by real investors. That is the paradox sitting underneath every storyline in this video. The individual conflict on the court is loud and public. The collective financial windfall underneath it is quiet and enormous, and both are true at the exact same time. Even the commissioner is frustrated. It is worth pointing out that growth this fast comes with real growing pains, and the league's own commissioner has admitted it publicly. Fans now have to track WNBA games across 7 different platforms in a single season: Disney's ABC and ESPN, NBC and Peacock, Amazon Prime Video, CBS, ION, USA Network, and NBA TV. Speaking with Sports Business Journal, Cathy Engelbert acknowledged that keeping up with all of it has become expensive and confusing, even for her personally, and admitted that fixing the cost of all those subscriptions is simply outside her control, since she does not run the media companies involved. That admission matters more than it sounds like on the surface. The league negotiated the biggest media deal in its history by spreading games across as many partners as possible to maximize total dollars. The trade-off is a fan experience that is genuinely harder to follow than it was 3 years ago. Growth and convenience pulled in opposite directions, and the league picked growth. The clause almost nobody has noticed. Here is the detail that should worry every single team executive in this league. And it is the one thing that could reshape all of this before the decade is even over. Buried inside that record media rights deal is what is being called a reset provision, kicking in starting in 2028. Either the league or its broadcast partners can trigger it, opening the door to renegotiate the terms of the entire agreement. Think about what that actually means. Every officiating controversy, every locker room tension story, every decision about who gets featured in a documentary and who gets left out, all of it is unfolding in the shadow of a deal that is not actually locked in for the full 11 years. If the audience keeps growing the way it has, that reset could mean an even bigger payday. If the tension boils over into something the broadcast partners see as a management failure, that same reset clause becomes leverage in the other direction. Nobody in the league office is talking about this openly right now. But every decision being made this season, every foul call, every documentary casting choice, every CBA negotiation is happening with that 2028 number sitting quietly in the background. Where this actually goes next. So where does this leave the WNBA heading into the back half of this season? The money is real, and it is historic. The salary jump for players is real, and it is historic. The officiating problem is real. It is not solved despite a task force being formed specifically to solve it, and it is creating a genuine divide between generations of players about what kind of league this should be. The league's own flagship documentary chose to spotlight players other than its biggest star this year, and that same star is sitting out marquee all-star weekend events she has participated in before. None of this needs a secret meeting or a hidden conspiracy to be dramatic. It is dramatic because it is happening in the open, on national television, with real financial consequences attached to every choice. The task force still has the rest of this season and the entire offseason to prove the physicality problem is fixable. The Players Association has to figure out how a locker room stays unified when the financial gap between its biggest star and everyone else keeps widening. And the league office has to figure out how to keep growing a $3 billion business without losing the team-first identity that built it in the first place. Think about everything you just heard. A rookie snubbed from an Olympic team 2 years ago over fears about how her own fans might react. A media deal that ballooned past $3 billion almost entirely because networks bet on one face of the league. A collective bargaining agreement that multiplied player salaries 5 times over in a single offseason. A flagrant foul to the throat that took days to even get upgraded. A task force that promised change at last year's All-Star game and is still being publicly criticized for failing at this year's. A documentary that chose 3 different stars to headline its biggest season yet. 3 players skipping the three-point contest in the same week. Attendance numbers quietly falling even as the national television numbers climb. And a reset clause sitting 2 years out that could rewrite every single financial relationship in this sport overnight. That is not a rumor. That is not an insider leak. That is simply what has been reported, confirmed, and said on the record by the people living through it, all in one season. Watch the officiating in the second half of this season. Watch whether the physicality directed at Clark and other high-usage stars actually changes now that the league has publicly committed to fixing it twice in 2 years. Watch who gets featured in league marketing heading into the playoffs and who gets quietly left in the background. Those are the real signals, and unlike anything printed as a rumor, they are things you can verify with your own eyes, game by game, for the rest of this season. We are going to be tracking every single one of them right here on this channel. If you want to actually understand where women's basketball is heading, instead of just reacting to headlines, subscribe now and turn on notifications because the next few months of this season are going to answer questions this entire video just raised. Drop a comment and tell me which side of this physicality divide you actually agree with, the players who say toughness is part of the game, or the players who say player safety comes first. I read every single one. See you in the next video.